Hi, and welcome to today's current news. Today is Thursday, April 18th, 2024. Today we will be listening to BBC, enormous ancient sea reptile identified from amateur fossil find. NPR, how do you keep calm and carry on in a world full of crisis? NPR, death doula says life is more meaningful if you get real about the end. NPR, Earth Day 2024, 8 ways to live more sustainably. Enormous ancient sea reptile identified from amateur fossil find. Scientists have identified what was probably the largest marine reptile ever to swim in the seas, a creature longer than 2 nose-to-nose buses. The creature lived around 202 million years ago alongside the dinosaurs. Its fossilized jawbone was found in 2016 by a fossil hunter on a beach in Somerset, UK. In 2020, a father and daughter found another similar jawbone. Experts now say the fossils are from 2 giant-ish reptiles, which could have been 25 meters long. That is bigger than a huge pliosaur, whose skull was found embedded in Dorset cliffs and was in the David Attenborough documentary The Giant Sea Monster. Based on the size of the jawbones, one of them over a meter long and the other 2 meters long, we can work out the entire animal would have been about 25 meters long, about as long as a blue whale, according to Dr. Dean Lomax, a paleontologist at the University of Bristol, who wrote the scientific paper published on Wednesday. But he says more evidence, like a complete skull and skeleton, is needed to confirm the exact size of the creature because just a few fragments have been found so far. The giant itch died out in mass extinction, and the itch that lived after that never reached the enormous size again, he said. The first glimpse of the creature came in 2016, when fossil hunter Paul de la Salle was scouring Somerset beaches. He has collected fossils for 25 years after being inspired by famous fossilist Steve Etches. Traveling the beach with his wife Carol, he saw what turned out to be the find of a lifetime, the first known jawbone of this giant marine reptile. When he talked to Dean Lomax, they suspected they might be on a major discovery. They published their findings in 2018, but they wanted more evidence to understand just how big the creature had been. We kept our fingers crossed for more discoveries, says Dean. In 2020, father and daughter Justin and Ruby Reynolds found what Dean was looking for, 10 kilometers down the coast at Blue Anchor. I was massively impressed, really excited. I knew that right at that point, we had a second giant jawbone from one of these massive itch, just like Paul's, Dean says. Paul rushed to the beach and helped them uncover more. I dug through all the thick mud. After about an hour, my shovel hit something solid, and this bone came out perfectly preserved, he says. The team, as well as family members, carried on looking for fragments of the second jaw. The last piece was found in 2022. The discovery gave them more evidence to estimate its size. Now they have concluded that the huge animal is a new species of itch, where they have named Itch severinensis, or giant fish lizard of the Severn. Dean co-wrote the latest scientific paper with Ruby Reynolds. One day, he says, the specimen she found may even be named Ruby. The specimen Paul found has been in his garage for 3 years while the team analyzed it. Soon it will go on public display at the Bristol Museum and Art Gallery. I will be a bit sad to say cheerio. I've come to know it and studied it in such intense detail, but it's also a relief because I won't have to worry about it so much, says Paul. Dean says the discovery highlights how important amateur fossil collectors are. Families and all sorts of people can make amazing discoveries. You don't have to be a world expert. As long as you have that bit of patience and a keen eye, you can make a discovery, he says. How do you keep calm and carry on in a world full of crisis? Plant just a few trees. Don't be afraid to reject your own ideas. Humble brag in a journal. This is some of the advice we heard last week when about 1,500 people who tried to make our planet a better place, from scientists and philanthropists to activists and entrepreneurs, descended on Oxford, England. In big forums and little coffee shops, they discussed what to do about some of the world's biggest problems and swapped advice from their work on the front lines. The Skull World Forum brought these people together in a bid to accelerate innovative solutions. We pulled a few of the participants aside and asked for their wisdom. We wanted to know their advice for the next generation of altruists, and with the Keep Calm and Carry On motto of England in mind, we also asked what keeps them going when things get tough. Their answers have been edited for length and clarity. Zolsifumba, be honest and vulnerable. Advice to those just starting out. Look at the pain that brought you to your work. It could be your own pain. It could be the pain of people around you, pain that you witnessed. Look at that pain and don't ignore it. I am someone who wasn't allowed to express themselves growing up, but that changed. And when I contracted multi-drug resistant tuberculosis as a medical student, they took us to a TB hospital. But when we got there, they didn't give us protection, such as a mask, since TB can be transmitted through airborne particles. So it was from there that I learned that my health and my wellness isn't a priority in the health system. But after I spoke to a second-year group of medical students, they told the faculty that if you don't protect us, we're not going anywhere. And so that was a powerful example of what my words could do. Getting TB can be deadly, but also saved my life because I finally got to use my voice, and I've never stopped talking. I've never stopped, and it really feels good to be honest and to be vulnerable. Julian Gerhardt, Humble Brag in a Journal. How to keep calm and carry on. I'm going to be practical because entrepreneurs love specific steps and takeaways. So what I do is that I have a journal and I write my small successes in that journal. And it could be anything. I could be one student coming up after our workshop and telling us he loved the workshop. A small thing, but it's very heartwarming. When I feel bad, when I feel depressed, when things are not going my way, and I start scrolling through my journal, that's how I calm myself very quickly. You start to realize how much impact you have, and it sounds pretty obvious, but when you feel depressed, your mind kind of forgets about positive things. If I didn't write these things down, if I didn't codify them, my mind would just forget them. So it's very important to celebrate these things, to document them. Irma Sit. Plant a tiny forest, or do anything that's small to boost your odds of success. Advice to those just starting out. When there's a system that needs to be transformed, reformed, reshaped, it can take decades, sometimes generations. When we know that from the beginning, it will help prevent us from getting burnt out. So my advice would be to identify some small things, some small objectives that you can really focus on. I wanted to build more forests in my homeland, Indonesia, and I started doing it in 2020 with my husband. I plant mini forests, tiny trees, sometimes just in the community's land or other people's land and on businesses' land. It has been a great way to reforest our urban areas because we don't need a huge piece of land. I started to take action, and I can see the results within my lifetime. Rana Dajani, ask yourself, what can I do now? Advice to those just starting out. I'm a biologist. I have to talk about science to give advice. Every human being is unique. Nobody's DNA is like anyone else who has ever lived, who lives today or will live in the future. So you're special. And because you're special, you have a special perspective on life. So whatever bothers you, go try to find a solution yourself. Trust your gut feeling and don't worry about changing the world. Think small. It's those small steps that can make a difference. How to keep calm and carry on. I'm an optimist. My husband says that I see an ocean in a drop of water when confronting a challenge. I think, what can I do? And I draw this from my religion as a Muslim. Islam tells me, it doesn't matter what happens in the end. What matters is what you do now. And so I start thinking, what can I do now? And that gives me a purpose. And because I have a purpose, I get into action. And because I'm getting into action, it gives me hope. There's a saying, if you can imagine it, then it can happen. And so I do that. And the other thing is I reach out to people. Nobody can solve anything alone. It's about collective humanity. Gabriel Marmon, consistency is more valuable than a really high IQ. I am hiring people who are 18 or 20 years old, and the way they think is different from my way of thinking, and I'm just 31. The younger generation wants results tomorrow. They are so immediate. They want things now. I see them changing clothes, changing relationships, changing work. But this is a real challenge for people who want to build things that are going to last. You need to have discipline and put in effort. So why have I been successful? Because I've been disciplined for 9 years. It is not because my mind is illuminated or my IQ is really high. It's not. It's just that I do things consistently. And I know you're not going to find all the answers with ChatGPT or TikTok. Bernard Chiara. Don't be afraid to change your mind. I mentor entrepreneurs, and I would say be very open to learning and be flexible to actually changing your mind. You may end up building a completely different solution to what you had thought was the solution. Entrepreneurs will naturally have a bias to love their ideas, and sometimes it can be very challenging to kill it and say, I was wrong. It's not going to work. It can be heartbreaking, but remember, The good thing is that entrepreneurs are like idea factories. You can always get more ideas. Death Doula says life is more meaningful if you get real about the end. As a death doula, Ulua Arthur helps people to plan for the end of life and, when the time comes, to let go. She says that while we're conditioned to fear death, thinking and talking about it is instrumental to creating meaningful lives. When I'm thinking about my death, I'm thinking about my life very clearly. What I value, who I care about, how I'm spending my time, Arthur says. And all these things allow us to reach the end of our lives gracefully, so that we can die without the fear and the concerns and the worries that many people carry. Before becoming a death doula, Arthur worked as an attorney, a job she hated. Unhappy and depressed, she took a trip to Cuba, where she met a fellow traveler who had terminal uterine cancer. Talking to the woman about death, Arthur realized she needed to make a change. Up until then, I was just kind of waiting for my life to right itself without taking any action to make it so, she says. Thinking about mortality, about my death, really created action. Arthur went on to found Going with Grace, an organization that helps people as they plan for the end of their lives. She says a big part of her work is helping people deal with regret as they reconcile the lives they've lived with the lives they might have wanted. When folks are grappling with the choices that they've made, my role is to be there with them, she says. Sometimes the greatest gift that we can offer is grace. Part of the reason why I named the business Going with Grace is because of the grace that needs to be present at the end of life, for people to be able to let go of it. Interview highlights. On the death of her brother-in-law, Peter, in 2013, it was the first time I was really faced with this reality that the people that we love might not be here for much longer. It felt really isolating. I knew intellectually that there were a lot of other people that were ill and getting close to the end of their lives, but it felt like we were the only ones that felt like we were on this little cancer planet by ourselves, where somebody we loved will soon be dying. And there wasn't some one person that I could turn to say, help, just help, I'm lost here, or today's really hard, or how do we navigate this, or what do we do with all these medications? Where can we find smaller sized hospital gowns that will arrive, like in the next days? Because he was losing weight so rapidly. We just needed some help, and I mean practically, but also just somebody to be there to listen, to rely upon, somebody that I could lean on as other people were leaning on me. Many people have already served as death doulas for somebody in their family, and most of us will at some point, which is why I think it's so important that we all have functional death literacy, because we live in community. We die in community. At some point, a member of that community is going to need support. So many of us are going to do it and already have. That's how I learned to do it through Peter. I took courses afterwards, but that was the initial spark, the initial practical application of the work itself. On facing grief. The thing about grief is whether or not you want to face it. It's going to find its way through. Either we don't acknowledge it emotionally and it manifests itself in our work, in our relationships, or addiction, or some other traumatic event, or it shows up in our bodies as illness. But grief is present. Grief lives in the body and it must be assessed at some point. It will force its way. I think that since we push so many of our sad or difficult emotions away, we don't allow peace for grief because it is difficult. But I don't yet know anybody who has died from grieving. It's hard. And yet there is always another day, provided we choose the next day. On the importance of talking to your medical proxy. The first thing I encourage people to do is to think about the person who will make the decisions for them in the event that they can't. That is a healthcare proxy or a medical power of attorney, or just somebody whose job it is to make your decisions. Somebody who would make the decision the way you would want it, not the way that they would. Not the things that they want for you, but rather what you want for yourself. And to begin communicating those desires to your healthcare proxy, because the communication of that desire is going to open up a beautiful, rich conversation about what you want with your life, how you want your life to eventually end, and if that is the way that it's going, and then get you started on the path toward planning for it. On how not talking about death openly leads to fear and anxiety. I think a lot of the old way of thinking is largely responsible for the death phobia that we currently experience in today's culture and society, where we pretend it's not happening, where bodies are whisked away to funeral homes just moments after the death has occurred. We don't take time with the body. We don't take time to talk about death. We pretend it's not happening until it's too late. That death phobia has caused a real crisis. I think in this country and in the West overall, where we are living out a relationship with nature with our mortality, which is ultimately a detriment to us as a culture, but also to us as individuals, on helping people who are at their worst. People are most human when they are dying. They are at their fullest. That means their best and their worst. I think as people are approaching the end, they are grieving as well. They are grieving their own death. They are grieving all the things that they're going to leave. I think we often forget that when somebody in our lives is dying, we are losing them. But they are losing everything and everyone and leaving the only place that they've known consciously. And so that brings out a lot of emotion. And some of it is anger and frustration. And sometimes disease causes personality changes. Sometimes there is some vitriol, and sometimes it's just really not pretty. If we can be present for their experience, which often is rooted in fear, then I think it allows us to not take it so personally and to give them some grace for what it is that they are really experiencing. On advice for caregivers, give yourself plenty of grace. You, I'm sure, are doing amazing because this is really, really hard. I wish somebody had said that to me at various points. Next, I'd also encourage that people try to take a minute to check in with their bodies and take care of their body's needs. Make sure that you're eating to the best that you can. Find pockets of rest where you can. To the extent that you can, speak your needs and let somebody else support you in it. If you have a need, no matter how small it might be, speak it and open the space for somebody to support you in it. And I'd also say reach out for some support if you can. Not only a friend, but there are plenty of doulas that are willing to support their community members at a free or reduced cost, maybe even a sliding scale. Reach out. There are plenty of resources that are available. But most importantly, if you hear nothing else, please just give yourself some grace for the process. It's tough. An advice for the moment you sit with a loved one during their death. Do your best to stay present. Do your best to stay in your body. It can be so confronting that the urge to disassociate or to distract is huge. And yet, if there's somebody that you loved and cared for, if you could hold thoughts of love and care and honor and gratitude for their lives, that's a really beautiful way to be during that time. And also, as always, give yourself plenty of grace for however it is that you're approaching it. Even there is somebody in the room that is having a bigger emotional reaction, ask for their consent before touching or interrupting it or being with it in any way. And not everybody who is crying wants the tears to stop or needs a tissue to plug them up or wants a hug. Maybe they want to stay present in their bodies without the imposition as well. It's utterly profound. Getting to witness the doorway to existence is a gift and a privilege and a huge honor. And so hopefully we can continue to treat it as such. Earth Day 2024. 8 ways to live more sustainably. Being an earthling isn't easy these days, from flash floods and devastating earthquakes to extreme heat. No matter where you are on the planet, the effects of the climate crisis are vast and real. We know individual actions can only get us so far, and solving the astronomical issue of climate change is the job of governments and policies. But we also know that our decisions matter. Consuming less energy at home, composting and upcycling, using our voices and our votes, all of these individual choices can help tip the scale towards progress. The Life Kit team curated some of our favorite sustainability tips from the past episodes. They're not going to solve the climate crisis, but these practices can help garner momentum as we work toward a more sustainable future. Switch to climate-friendly home appliances. By using home appliances and vehicles that run on electricity, we can help reduce our carbon footprint and leave more fossil fuels in the ground. Here are a few appliances to consider. Induction stove. These use magnetism to heat a pan and consume less energy than a traditional electric stove. Clothing dryers with the Energy Star label. Efficient dryers that have the Energy Star label use about 20% less energy than regular dryers. Water heaters that use heat pump technology. They're 2 to 3 times more efficient than most electric water heaters and can help save money on utility bills. Making these upgrades to your home and lifestyle will cost money, and you will need to plan ahead. So don't feel like you have to change out your appliances overnight. Instead, buy them as your existing machines wear out. Eat seafood responsibly. Let's say you're at a restaurant or the fresh fish counter at the supermarket and you want to get the salmon, but you're not sure whether it's sustainable. To find out, simply ask the server or the fishmonger. Here are 2 key questions. Is this fish pole or line caught? If the answer is yes, that's usually a good sign, says Jennifer Dianto Kemmerly, Vice President of the Global Ocean Initiatives at the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California. Even at a commercial scale, a fishing boat can see what they just reeled in, and if they caught a fish that's too small or is a different species they didn't intend to catch, they can quickly release it. Is a fish caught in the U.S.? If so, it's probably a sustainable choice. The U.S. has some of the most stringent regulations of fishing in the world, Kimberly says. Eat less meat. Meat production is hard on the environment. It requires a lot of land to raise cattle, and globally, many forests are being cleared to make room for those animals. Deforestation releases a lot of heat trapping carbon dioxide that had been stored in the trees into the environment, and cows themselves release a lot of methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, in the form of burps. If people in the US and other heavy meat eating countries could cut back their beef consumption, it would have a major impact on creating a more sustainable food system. To curb your diet's environmental impact and fight climate change, you could go vegetarian or vegan, but you don't have to. It turns out cutting back a little can have a big impact. Richard Waits, a senior research associate in the food program at the World Resource Institute, recommends eating less of the most resource-intensive meats: goat, lamb, and especially beef. The most commonly consumed of these meats, cows, take the most land to grow and feed, he says. Ditch fast fashion. Keep your clothes for the long haul. Trends move so quickly these days. It's tempting to buy what's hot and follow whatever fleeting microtrend is in right now. But that leads to more clothes in landfills. Only 1% of clothing actually gets recycled into new clothing, and making textiles is a very water-intensive process, not to mention human labor issues with a lot of fast fashion manufacturing. If you want to reduce fashion waste, ask yourself one question before you buy a new item of clothing. Will I wear this at least 30 times? This question, says thrifting advocate Symphony Clark, can shift your mindset and help you buy clothing with the notion that it should stay with you for a long time. Freeze produce you can't use right away, and compost scraps once you have. About 8% of greenhouse gas emissions come from wasted food, and roughly half of all food waste occurs during the consumption stage, meaning waste from food service and households. One of the best tools to help reduce wasted food, the freezer. Here's how to use it. If you're not ready to use fresh fruit and vegetables right away, freeze them. This locks in flavor and nutrients and is better than letting fresh produce languish in the fridge. Store your compost. Fruit and vegetable peels, eggshells, coffee grinds in the freezer until you fill the bag and take it to your local community garden or compost collector. That way, you can keep out smell and vermin and then contribute to creating rich, healthy soil to grow new food. Cut back on plastic by figuring out how much you use and why. The plastics problem is overwhelming. There's so much of it overflowing landfills and littering waterways, and a lot of it can't or won't be recycled. The most effective thing you can do is cut back on plastic is to figure out how much you use. Environmental activist Shilpi Katre suggests going room by room, bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, living room, and doing an audit of the plastics in your home. Don't forget to check the trash. Not only will this help you understand how much plastic you use, but how you're using it. That way you can make a plan for how to cut back. Are you using a bottle of body wash? Replace it with a bar of soap. Bring your own tote bags for groceries instead of packing your goods in plastic bags, or your favorite usable mug to your local coffee shop. Switch to clean energy at home. Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, in a lot of states, you may be able to move away from powering your home with fossil fuels, as long as you pay your utility bill. Call your local utility company and let them know that you want your electricity to come from 100% clean energy, says Donald Bayard, CEO of Block Power, a startup company that's carrying out energy upgrades of buildings in several cities. While your utility company stays the same, you may be able to choose the supplier of your energy. A quick call to your utility company to make the switch can lead to a meaningful change in the way you power your home. Use your voice and vote. We know that passing on plastic straws is not going to do much to limit Earth's warming, so speak up. Tell companies what practices you want to see from them. They're listening more than ever before, says Heath Harrison, CEO of the Recycling Partnership. If you want to influence policy, let your representatives know what matters to you. Write them, call them, and keep the climate in mind as you think about voting. And if you got big ideas you aren't seeing reflected, consider running for office yourself with this handy guide. Thank you for joining me today.